Good day everyone and welcome back to the channel for another episode of Structure Deck Scrutiny. Last time we looked at Blazing Destruction, which I described as a massive step down from Zombie Madness in terms of quality, about the same level as Dragon's Roar I would say, and with Fury from the Deep we see a definite pattern emerging here in terms of early deck Structure Deck releases, where we go from a bad one to a good one and then back to a bad one again. Because yes, this deck is arguably on par with Zombie Madness and a strong contender for the best early Structure Deck crown. In fact, if you're aware of any of the early structure decks, I would wager that it's this one, and the reputation as the best early year structure deck is well known thanks to DZeek's video on it and Stevie Reviews' structure deck tier list video. And yes, the deck definitely deserves this reputation. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that out of the box this is one of the best, if not the best. However, I would still argue that it's only the second best overall structure deck, and I'll explain why here. So let's dive on in, shall we? And no, I'm not going to stop doing puns anytime soon. Being the water-themed structure decks to counter the fire-themed Blaze of Destruction, Fury from the Deep focuses on water monsters, in particular ones that work well with Yuumi and Yuumi retrains, to both control the board and deliver a ton of damage when combined with stall cards so they can slip under. What makes the deck so good that, unlike its predecessors, almost every card in this deck works towards this strategy, with minimal fluff pieces only there for flavour reasons. So let's take a look at why this deck was so good back in the day, shall we? Now usually I begin these guides by looking at the deck's monsters, but as it's vital for the deck's strategy, I think today we should look at the field spell, a legendary Ocean first. A simple but powerful card, Ocean has 3 effects, all of which are built around to some degree in this deck. Firstly, Ocean is always treated as Yuumi, something that we'll see is very important to the deck's overall strategy. Unlike the card it impersonates, it gives all water monsters a 200 point buff. Admittedly not the best effect, but sometimes giving an 1800 beater or 1500 direct attacker a little boost can make the difference, so it's a nice little include here. However, what makes this card so good for its time is the fact that it gives all your water monsters a permanent cost down effect, reducing their levels by 1 in both the field and the hand. These 3 effects combine together to create a powerful playmaker for this deck that gives us big beaters, hard to outstall effects, and if we're lucky even a bow wipe or 2. Pretty much every monster and most back row in this deck either directly work with this card or are enhanced greatly by it. Now this obviously makes the deck strong as there's a lot of synergy between its cards, even its weaker monsters can be formidable beaters with the field spell online. However, this also makes the deck one of the most vulnerable to back row hate, as if you don't have this field spell online, your deck can suffer hard. To show what I mean here, let's take a look at Amphibious Bugroth and Mermaid Knight. Both 1500 attack level 4s, Knights can make 2 attacks a turn if Yuumi is up, and Bugroth can attack directly if it's up. So if we do have a legendary Ocean in play, Mermaid Knights can slash through defences like butter and kill in 3 turns on an empty field, while Bugroth has a 5-turn clock all by himself, and they can both do this while Gravity Bind is up, preventing your opponent from striking back. However, if you don't have a legendary Ocean in play, or the card gets removed, all you really have are 2 1500 vanillas, and that's the main problem with this deck. This good if Ocean is up but bad if not problem is not unique to these 2 cards, as we'll see, and it's the main reason I can't say this deck for certain is better than Zombie Madness. However, this isn't the case with all the deck's monsters, as seen in 7 Coloured Fish, Sea Serpent Warrior of Darkness and Space Mambo. 1800 and 1700 beaters respectively, these cards are good on rate by themselves, being quite big for 2005 era level 4s, but combined with Ocean they become essentially better Berserk Gorillas and Archfiend Soldiers, becoming 2000 and 1900 attack beaters that can attack under Gravity Bind and level limit area B. Honestly, if the deck had more cards like this, cards that are good without the Ocean and busted with it, then this deck would be the best deck of the era by a long way. Finally, in terms of monsters that work well with Yuumi, we have Leviathan Dragon Daedalus and its evolved form and boss of this deck, Ocean Dragon Lord Neo Daedalus. Now we'll start with Leviathan Dragon, as honestly, even though the Lord is stronger, this guy still in my opinion is the true boss of this deck. A level 7 2600 attack monster that if Ocean is active will be a level 6 2800, Daedalus is the ultimate do or die card. When summoned you can sacrifice an Yuumi and destroy every other card on the field. Now obviously a full bow wipe is powerful, after all Heavy Storm is one of the best cards in this era, and cards like Regeki, Harpies and Dark Hole were all banned by this point. However, this play is very risky, as your opponent does make a comeback, we were playing on the back foot without any legendary Ocean. However, with several cards that want monsters in the grave or can bring them back, it's not as big a problem as it first seems, with cards like FENRIR able to banish the monsters we destroyed, for example. Now, as it requires you to sacrifice Levia Dragon Daedalus, you can imagine that Ocean Lord Daedalus is a more powerful effect, and boy is it. With Levia Dragon wiping the whole field, Ocean Lord also does this, and also wipes out every card in both players' hands, making it the closest thing we had at this time to Chaos Emperor Dragon. However, as good as it is in a vacuum, this card still has the same downside as all of the boss monsters from around this era. The bin that requires a specific monster to summon it, often making it a brick in the hand. In addition to this structure deck unupgraded doesn't exactly have the best top decks, meaning that if you pointed out this card, it's a complete roll of the dice of who's going to win, with both players having a very minimal board and no cards in hand. Honestly though, out of all the bosses we've covered so far, this is the only one that I'd say might be worth keeping in an upgraded form of the deck, but we'll see about that when we get to that section. Outside of the cards that directly synergize with Umi, we have a playset of Mother Grizzly, the Water Recruiter monster. And again, this is another card who is the second best in this series thus far to its Zombie Madness counterpart. Like most recruiters, Grizzly can search any water monster with it under attack. Now Italy hasn't got the greatest pool to search from, but it can get out Umi monsters if we have the ocean in play. In addition to this, it can grab us a card to help us get out Levy Dragon, or as we're about to see in a bit, a Time Seal effect. However, this card does get a lot better upon upgrading the deck, as it can get access to Sinister Serpent, which is a lot of synergy with this deck, but more on that in a bit. Speaking of the Time Seal effect, our next monster is FENRIR. Requiring us to banish 2 waters from grave, FENRIR allows us to skip our opponent's draw phase whenever it destroys a monster. At 1400 attack, I admit this card may have some trouble running over some monsters, but with the Ocean's extra 200 point buff, plus another card giving it a buff we'll see later, it will likely beat over enough cards to get a couple of draw denials. Now we can't Yatterlock with this card, because eventually the opponent from not drawing will have no monsters for us to destroy. However, denying our opponent a few draw phases can be enough advantage to guarantee us the win. This can be especially good in a simplified game state, like say Ocean Lord has recently wiped both players' fields and hands. We do have 2 other powerful monsters in this deck, but I'll save them for the reprint section of the video. For this section, however, the rest of the monsters here are a bit underwhelming. However, there aren't many of them, so we'll get through this quickly. First we have Starboy, who is a little chimera of the water type, giving all our water monsters a 500 attack point buff. Now with this tiny stat, this card isn't amazing, but I would argue he's better than Chimera, due to most of the monsters in this deck being able to benefit from his buff, while he is also protected by a stall card like Gravity Bind, as long as Legendary Ocean is on the field. Next we have Unshaven Angler, which apart from being one of the worst named cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Seriously Konami, just call it Bearded Angler or something. It's a great example of a solution in search of a problem. The card is the Seahorse of Waters. Angler can be used as 2 tributes for a water monster. The amount of monsters we have that this card can help summon? 1 without Legendary Ocean, and 0 with it. Yes, I get that Levy Dragon can be a brick without Ocean, but having only 1 of this card and 1 Levy Dragon means more like this card bricks your hand than unbricks a dead Levy Dragon. Last, and definitely least, we have Creeping Doom Manta, a 1300 level 4, whose only effect is that trap cards can be activated when he's normal summoned. Honestly, I can't think for the life of me what use this card could have. The only thing it does is prevent the opponent from trap holing it, a card that I hadn't seen play in years when this card was printed. It doesn't stop bottomless because it's too weak, and any other trap card can be used after the summon like Regeki Break. Definitely one of the worst cards in the deck and one of the only ones there for flavour reasons. Also one of the first cards you'll definitely be cutting upon upgrading this deck. Outside of the reprints and staples, we actually have a few good cards to talk about in terms of spells and traps. First up is Gravity Bind, which prevents monsters level 4 and above from attacking. Now the card is already a powerful stall card, however as I've shown in this video, when combined with the Legendary Ocean it becomes a straight up nasty floodgate that prevents the opponent from attacking, while leaving our reduced level 4 monsters free to do so. Honestly, this fact is so good in this deck that the first upgrade I would suggest would be to add level up area Bs for more copies of this effect. In a similar vein, we also have the trap Tornado Wall, which as long as there is a Yumi on the field acts as a permanent Waboku effect, making it even harder for the opponents to land a hit on us. However, again being reliant on Umi does make it a brick when we don't draw or lose a Legendary Ocean, so I'd still argue Gravity Bind is by far the better stall card in this deck. And honestly, we might want to cut this card for lowest area B, which is more consistent. Outside of these cards, we have 2 non-staples to talk about. First up we have Salvage, a normal spell that allows us to add back 2 water monsters with 1500 or less attack from the graveyard back to our hand. Able to recur both for our Yumi enablers, as well as FENRIR and Starboy. Along with our recruiters, this card is a surprisingly versatile piece of recovery. It's also by far one of the best cards to top deck after Ocean Lord has wiped the field in hand. And finally we have a card that I can't decide if I like or not, in Big Wave, Small Wave. A normal spell, this card allows us to destroy every water monster we control, and then summon that many water monsters from our hand. Now obviously this card has a lot of drawbacks. It's a straight -1 at best for starters, and like most bad cards in this deck, it's very situational, as you need to have a monster on the field and in hand to use it, and you also need to have a good hand and bad field to make it worthwhile. However, this card has another way to get Leviathan Dragon on board. It can fill up the grave for FENRIR and can replace dead Yumi monsters with big beaters. I don't think this card is great, and honestly it may be a card you'd cut, but I don't think it's dreadful either. I don't know, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Overall, while it does have a couple of brick cards, Free from the Deep is a very well put together deck right out of the box, with a coherent strategy buff with many good staples. It only has a few dead cards, a powerful field spell the deck is built around well, and one of the best boss monsters in early Structure deck Yu-Gi-Oh history. I have no trouble giving this base deck an A, so let's see how it does when we fully upgrade it. Okay, so I won't deny that this was an amazing deck right out of the box, possibly the best early game Structure deck in this aspect, and was more than capable of taking down the locals of this era. However, when it comes to taking this deck to the next level and making it more competitive for the time, upgrading it to its final form if you will, I'm sorry to say that we already are pretty much at the ceiling of this deck's potential, in my opinion, and there isn't much that can be added, meaning that the best that can be done with this deck is making it a top tier locals deck, or maybe a rogue at best deck at high level events. So let's see where we can go with this, shall we? Outside of upgrading our important cards to 3, there isn't much we can do with this deck. However, there are 2 good water monsters I would have definitely considered adding back in the day: Sinister Serpent and Abyss Soldier. Now Serpent I've talked about in my Goat Farm videos before. It's a 300 attack monster that comes back to our hand each turn. This makes it a great card to send off a trap-infecting virus, and also a good card to have in hand or on field when Ocean King goes off, giving us one more card in the hand after this effect than the opponent. Abyss Soldier is another 800 attack water beater, however he also comes with a really powerful effect that actually plays very well with Sinister Serpent. As for the cost of discarding a water monster, this card can bounce any card in the field to the owner's hand. This gives the deck not only another good Berserk Gorilla under Ocean, but also a way to remove problematic cards to push through damage and fill up the grave if FENRIR plays later on in the game. In addition to this, I feel the biggest upgrade this deck needs is more ways to both search for and recur a legendary ocean, given how much our deck revolves around it. So because of this, I highly suggest adding a few copies of Terraforming and Magician of Faith. We all know how good Terraforming is, as it has been at 1 in modern Yu-Gi-Oh for years, and it's no less powerful in a deck from 2005 that also relies on its field spell. In fact, it's more so because we can play a full playset of them here. Now I don't know if I would suggest doing that, but a few would definitely be a good way to power up this deck. However, even more so than finding Ocean, I'd argue the most important upgrade we can make to this deck is recurring it, so I suggest some copies of Magician of Faith. As well, it has no synergy with the water theme, it's essentially 3 more activations of Ocean, and means we don't necessarily scoop automatically to an MST or Heavy Storm. Next up, I think we need to tighten up this deck's defences. So to complement Gravity Bind, I add a couple of copies of Level Limit Area B, as they're essentially 2 more copies of what is under Ocean, one of the best effects in this deck. And finally, I think another staple I'd recommend for this deck would be Sangan. Since we don't really want to play multiples of Bugroth or Mermaid, it's important we have more ways to search them when they are needed, and Sangan can not only get them, but also FENRIR and our upgrades in Serpent and Faith. Outside of this, I'd recommend upping the amount of beaters in this deck and cutting the dead water monsters along with the traps like Xing Zhen Hu and Spell Shields Type 8 that don't really add much to this deck overall. Like I said in the intro to this section, there isn't much we can really do here as this deck was well built already, so the best we can do is add more staples and up the amount of the deck's best cards, and even then we still only have a local Stomper and possibly Rogue at higher levels event deck. Don't hate me here, but I'm giving this deck in this upgraded form a C+. Finally, let's see what this deck had to offer you once you got bored of curb stomping kids with no sleeves and 60 cards at locals and wanted to take down that one jerk who brought his fully foiled Chaos deck, who always beat you once he drew his Metal Raiders foil Heavy Storm. Not that bitter from childhood, why do you ask? First up we have Tribe Infecting Virus, and we can stop this section right here and give the deck an A in this category already. I know that nowadays this card doesn't look like much, as there are much better bullwebs for much less cost nowadays, but in this era with both Raigeki and Dark Orb banned, this is by far the best way to clear an opponent's field, so much so that it sees playing like 9% of GOAT format decks, basically everything other than the fastest combo decks like Empty Jar. What this card does is that for a discard, you can choose one creature type and destroy all monsters in the field of that type. Also, this was both not a once per turn, and available in the same format as the original version of Sinister Serpent, essentially making him a Raigeki on legs back in the day. And this deck was the only time this card saw a wide reprint, having only 2 prints before this as a super and rare respectively. So this deck giving every player access to one of this card was amazing back in the day. Up next, much like his fire counterpart in the previous deck, we have Mobius the Frost Monarch, and unlike Thestalos, this card is not only great in the Monarch strategy itself, but also a side deck staple of this time period. This is because with only 3 cards away back row in Heavy Storm, MST and Dust Tornado, some decks wanted more ways of defeating heavy back row decks like Burn and Stall. A 2400 body that can pop 2 back row fit nicely into many decks, side decks, especially the monster good stuff decks that dominated the game at the time period, like Goat Control and some Chaos decks. Like all structures at this time, we get the reprints of most staples, like Pot of Greed, MST, Heavy Storm and Premature Burial, which as I made clear, were pretty much the building blocks for a competitive deck back in the day. However, there is one unique spell reprint that I feel was very underrated, and that is Hammer Shot. Another member of the Fisher family of removal spells, Hammer Shot destroys the monster on the field with the highest attack. Another time this deck's release, this card admittedly saw very little play, as Smashing Ground was by far the better option back then. However, a couple of years later this card would become very played in Trooper and Perfect Circle formats, so it's nice to see it printed here. Finally, in the trap section we have a Water themed reprint that's actually amazing in the form of Torrential Tribute, which along with Tribe is another way to wipe the field. We also got good reprints of Call of the Haunted and Dust Tornado, meaning that once again we have around 70% of a GOAT deck's back row in this structured deck alone. Like most of its contemporaries, Fury from the Deep was an excellent supplier of back row that could be a good first step. However, the fact that it also includes one of the best generic main deck monsters and one of the best side deck monsters puts it above all previous decks in this category in my opinion, and I have no problem giving this deck an A star in this category. So all in all, I do agree with the consensus that this is one of the best structured decks in the early style of theme above strategy, and by far the strongest right out of the box. It had a coherent game plan that was both simple to understand and easy to pull off, many good individual beaters and effect monsters, and above all else, actual synergy with its cards. However, I still have to give the title of best early structured deck to Zombie Madness, because it also had these qualities and was also highly upgradable to the point of being a tier 1 deck, while I feel like Fury is close to its peak right out of the box, with only a few upgrades possible. So that was Fury from the Deep on Structured Deck Scrutiny. Join us next week we'll look at Warrior's Triumph, and we actually got 2 good decks in a row! It's a miracle! Enjoy it now people, because we won't be seeing that for a while. See you guys next time.